Welcome everyone. This video of system dynamics is about Vensim and a short introduction to the program. When you first load Vensim, you have a screen that looks like this, and you have several options. And the first thing you need to do to begin with a model, and a brand new model, is in the right corner you have a new model, and you have a window that gives you, to begin with, the default settings for how to run your simulation. Start at time 0, then the final time, and the incremental step. Vensim is a continuous simulation, and you have to, the increment in time happens every so often. You can change that, and we'll give you fractions of the period. The period is specified in this particular example in months, but you can select weeks, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. And quarters and years. So I'm going to leave it in months. And then this is a more technical characteristics, the type of integration. So when we say that the time step is 1, that means that the clock is going to increment in steps of 1 month. I'm going to change that to 1/4 of a month, and I hit OK. All right. This section here on top are where most of your immediate options are to build a model. I like to start with levels. The reason why I start with levels is because when we include flows, the flows goes from an indefinite source into the particular level. We have also variables that we can name. And we can drag around to make it more readable. In this particular example, I'm just creating a very simple feedback loop in which I have 2 variables. The goal and the current level will determine the gap between the level and the goal, and that gap will be used to control how much flow we want to have in order to fulfill the level. We can adjust these lines. The recommendation is to have these lines curved for it's easier to read for some reason, and that way I have used variables, levels, arrows, and rates of flows. Now I'm going to use a little bit of graphical interface in which I can use a slider to modify the goal. And I can resize that. And maybe I like to have also, as one of the outputs, the level, to see how it changes. And I will want it represented as a graph. So I can resize this graph on my screen. and the horizontal axis will represent the time, and the vertical axis will represent the level, the value of that level. So there are basically two forms to, well, before we run it, we need to specify the values. Here you have an equation. All the boxes that are marked in black needs to be defined. If I go to the level, I have the initial value, and I can set it up, say for instance, to 100. The goal, let's say I want to increase to 400. The gap is going to be, here you have the variables that I can use. These are the variables that are incoming into this particular variable, are the goal and the level. And the way that I can compute the gap is the gap equals, here's a little equal sign, equals the goal, just need to click on that, minus the level. Notice how the ones that you have already defined are turning into regular font as opposed to inverse with black background. That means that only flow is pending, and we are just going to use the gap at this moment to see what happens. So there are basically two ways to run this. One way is to run as a single instance simulation. If I run it like this, I click yes in these options, and here I have the computation of the level rapidly goes from the current level of 100 to a value of 400. It is not necessarily very clear in this image because most of the time it's already at 100, and then from that moment on we don't have to change it. We can modify the length of the run, say for instance just for 20 units. If I go to model, settings, and only 20 months, I click OK and run the model again, and even then it only takes about almost 4 years of time. You are already at 400 for 4 months. Okay, there's another way to do this, and that is to instead of running only once, have it running in the background. If you run it in the background now, what you had as individual variables in this particular goal, you can set it up and change it dynamically. So let's say for instance your goal is 950. Now you can see the changes and how it reaches 950. So that's it. That's a quick introduction to the basics on how to run Vensim. There are two ways to run it with these two options here. The way that you build your model is with these options, and the others you're familiar with how to open a file or save or print, etc. In a future video, we're going to discuss your options to the left and then the other options to the right. Thank you.